I'm going to tell you how to break the habit of loving someone who makes you feel small. Straight to the point, no fluff, no excuses. Because deep down, you know you're doing it, and you also know it's tearing you apart inside. Every time you excuse their coldness, every time you minimize what you feel so you don't make them uncomfortable, every time you settle for less thinking, they'll eventually change. That's not love. It's emotional conditioning that teaches you to see yourself as small so you won't lose them. It's an invisible addiction that Carl Jung would call the unconscious repetition of your original wound. I'm going to guide you from that place where your energy shrinks to fit into a love that limits you, toward the full expansion of your feminine power, where you no longer beg to be seen because you're finally able to see yourself clearly. This isn't theory, it's real transformation, and it starts right now. So please help me out by liking this video and subscribing. Let's go all in. Your love doesn't come from love. It comes from a wound that makes you feel less than. If right now you're loving someone who makes you feel invisible, ignored, or not enough, that's not love. That's a wound disguised as a bond. And unless you recognize it, you'll keep calling feelings what is really just emotional dependency dressed up as romance. Carl Jung said that what we don't make conscious shows up in our lives as fate. And when it comes to relationships, that translates into repeating the same pattern over and over again. Loving someone who makes you feel small, chasing after someone who doesn't choose you, or staying tied to someone who doesn't respect you. But why does this happen? Why would a brilliant, capable woman with so much to give feel drawn to someone who doesn't even see her? The answer isn't in your current relationship. It's not even in your last one. It's in your original wound. It's in that little girl inside you who, at some point in her life, learned that to be loved, she had to earn it. That love wasn't a right, but a reward. That to avoid being rejected, she had to make herself small, adapt, stay quiet, not be a bother. That little girl grew up and became a woman, but the belief stayed. It turned into a shadow. It became an unconscious system of attraction. And without realizing it, you started craving the same things that made you feel like you did back then. Small, because your wound wasn't looking for love. It was looking for validation through someone else. It wasn't searching for love. It was searching for redemption. Let me tell you a true story that perfectly illustrates this. Her name is Mary. She was always the kind of woman who gave everything. Her soul, her body, her time, her attention, everything. She was with a man who never valued her, who took ages to reply to her messages, who made her doubt whether he really wanted anything serious with her. But Mary kept holding on, justifying everything. He's busy. He has a lot on his mind. He's just not very expressive. Sound familiar? In one of our conversations, I asked her a single question that changed everything. Why do you need him to choose you if you already know he's not good for you? Mary fell silent. Then she burst into tears. Because if he chooses me someday, it means I was worth it. See? Mary didn't love that man. She loved the idea that if he changed one day, it would prove she had value. Her love wasn't love. It was a distorted way of trying to heal an internal wound. And that's the truth we so often don't want to see. The love you give to someone who makes you feel small is not true love. It's a silent cry from your wound, begging to be validated. It's your wounded inner child trying to prove that this time she deserves what she didn't receive when she needed it most. But your soul doesn't heal that way. Your soul can't rebuild itself from a place of lack, nor from repeating the same pain. It rebuilds itself from awareness. Loving someone who makes you feel small is a form of self-abandonment because you're staying somewhere that doesn't resonate with your truth, simply because you're afraid to face your own emptiness. You're pouring your energy into someone who doesn't take care of it just because you'd rather have those emotional crumbs than face the silence of your own company. And here comes an uncomfortable truth. As long as you keep seeking validation from someone who minimizes you, you'll keep reinforcing the idea that you alone are not enough. You're not in love with him. You're trapped in the cycle of your wound, because no one who truly loves themselves chooses to stay somewhere their soul has to shrink, because no one who values themselves needs someone else's permission to feel powerful. Carl Jung spoke of the archetype of the inner savior. That part of you that must awaken when your ego tries to drag you down. And in this context, your savior is your emotional awakening. That part of you that says, I wasn't born to love from a place of lack. I'm not going to keep shrinking myself to fit into loves that don't recognize me. Breaking this habit takes an act of brutal honesty. It means looking yourself in the mirror and telling yourself the truth. I don't want to keep loving from my wound. And that's not easy because it requires letting go of fantasies, breaking illusions, accepting that what you thought was love was really attachment, need, habit, fear. But when you do it, something inside you changes. You no longer need him to choose you. You no longer hurt so deeply when he doesn't reply. You no longer feel anxious when he pulls away because your energy begins choosing you instead. And then the cycle breaks because you can't keep repeating the pattern once you see it clearly. Because once you realize that your love wasn't coming from your soul, but from your wound, you can't keep giving it in the same way. And that's where your true liberation begins. Because deep down, you already know you deserve more. And the most powerful revelation is still to come. What happens when you realize it's not him who's making you feel small? It's you who's shrinking yourself so he won't leave. You're about to understand this like never before. He's not the one making you small. You're shrinking yourself to fit into his world. Let me pause briefly to ask you for a favor from the heart. I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to the channel. That helps me keep creating these soul-driven messages. And the best part is, it's completely free for you. So if you want to keep raising your energy with this community, subscribe now, and let's keep going with the most powerful part still ahead. It's not that he made you feel like you were nothing. It's not that he stole your shine. It's not that he directly dimmed your light. The truth is even harsher and even more liberating. It was you who, without realizing it, kept making yourself smaller in order to keep belonging to a world where your greatness didn't fit. And this isn't about blame, it's about awareness. So often we believe it's the other person who's minimizing us, that it's their indifference, their harsh words, or their lack of attention that makes us feel small. But when you look deeper, when you really stop and observe your behavior, your vibration, your energy in that relationship, you discover something that hits you right in the soul. It wasn't him who made you shrink. It was you who shrank yourself so as not to be a burden. And while that truth hurts, it also gives you back your power. Because what you did, you can also undo. Carl Jung said the soul tends to mold itself to the environment around it, especially when that environment triggers our unconscious wounds. And that's exactly what happened to you. You didn't adapt to him out of love. You adapted out of fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being abandoned. Fear that your light would be too much. That's how you started to diminish yourself. You stopped saying what you thought. You stopped showing your strength. You stopped shining naturally. You became quieter, more flexible, more patient, but not from love, from fear of losing him. And with every step you took backward, he perceived you less and less. Because vibrationally, that's what you were communicating. I'm not important here. I just want you to see me. I'm willing to mold myself into whatever you want. Let me tell you another true story that exposes this pattern in the most heartbreaking way. Her name is Sabrina. She was an intense, creative, powerful woman. Her energy lit up any room. But when she met Martin, something in her changed. He was more serious, colder, less expressive. And instead of standing firm in her own authenticity, Sabrina began to soften her energy. "So I don't overwhelm him," she'd say. She stopped laughing so loudly. She stopped sharing her wild ideas. She stopped talking about the things that ignited her soul because he wasn't interested. Little by little, she made herself smaller. One day while we were talking, she said something that shattered her inside. "I don't know who I am anymore when I'm with him. It's like I've dissolved myself just to fit into his world." And that was the entire problem. Sabrina hadn't been minimized. She had chosen, out of fear, out of her wound, to compress herself so she could fit into a relationship where she didn't feel free to be who she truly was. It wasn't him clipping her wings. It was her folding them away every time she felt he didn't understand her. And that same dynamic, in greater or lesser measure, has probably happened to you too. You can't become the woman of your dreams if you spend your life trying not to make uncomfortable the man who can't handle your light. And here comes a brutal truth. When you shrink yourself to be liked, you stop being magnetic and instead become merely convenient. And convenience is never cherished. It's only used. That's why he doesn't perceive you as a goddess, as an unforgettable woman, as a unique energy. Because you yourself turned off your own fire so he wouldn't feel the heat. But here's the good news. Your fire's still there. That part of you that laughed loudly, that spoke with passion, that never asked permission to exist, she's still alive. She's just buried under layers of self-censorship, fear, and loyalty to a version of yourself you thought would be easier to love. So I'll leave you with one question that could change everything. How much longer are you going to keep diminishing yourself to stay in a place where you're not even celebrated? Love is not about shrinking. Love is not about resignation. Love is not about molding yourself until you disappear. Love is freedom. Love is expansion. Love is being able to be yourself without that costing you the connection. And if he can't love the woman you are when you're in your center, then he doesn't deserve to be near you when you bloom. Simple as that. Carl Jung spoke about the self as the center of our inner wholeness, and he said that every emotional illness happens when we drift away from that center. Do you know what happens when you shrink your emotional size? You stray from that center. You betray your truth in order to sustain a bond that no longer resonates with you. And that betrayal always comes at a cost. Emptiness, anxiety, silent sadness. That's why the first act of self-love isn't leaving him. It's returning to your original size. It's returning to your unfiltered laughter, to your ideas that sometimes don't fit in, to your intense sensitivity, your fire, your greatness. And when you come back to yourself, you'll see it clearly. It wasn't that he made you feel less. It was that you were making yourself smaller so you wouldn't lose him. But now you don't need to keep doing that, because now you know your worth. And in the next part, you're going to discover something even more powerful. So pay close attention. That connection you have is not love. It's emotional addiction to external validation. If it hurts more than it nourishes you, if it takes more than it gives, if it makes you feel less yet you can't let go, then it's not love. It's something else. It's a wound disguised as desire. It's an addiction disguised as connection. It's the cruelest trap of all. Emotional addiction to external validation. And yes, you heard that right. Addiction. Because it's not affection that keeps you there. It's emotional withdrawal. It's that inner state where you feel incomplete unless you get a dose of attention, a sign of approval, a "I miss you" every 3 days, which may mean nothing, but gives you just enough to keep you from letting go. Sound familiar? Carl Jung said that when we don't integrate our inner deficiencies, we seek someone outside ourselves to confirm that we exist. And that's exactly what so many women confuse with love. The desperate need to be seen, recognized, chosen, even by someone who doesn't truly value them. And the most painful truth is this. It's not that you love that person. It's that you love how they make you feel in those moments when it seems for a second that they really do love you. That's where the hook happens. Let me share a true story that illustrates this dynamic with brutal clarity. Her name is Vanessa. She was 34 years old. She had a solid career, impressive emotional intelligence in many areas. But with him, it all fell apart. He was inconsistent. He'd appear and disappear. He'd say wonderful things to her and then ignore her for days. He'd promise dates he never kept. Yet with every message, she felt that little rush that kept her hanging on just a bit longer. Vanessa swore she loved him, that he was the love of her life, that there was something about him that transformed her. But as we worked together on her story, I asked her a single question that left her speechless. Do you love him? Or do you love how you feel when he gives you what he denies you the rest of the time? And that's when it all clicked for her. Vanessa wasn't in love. She was hooked, trapped, dependent on those brief moments of attention that made her feel special, only to fall back into waiting, emptiness, and anxiety. That's not love. That's external validation turned into addiction. And like any addiction, it has its cycles. First the craving, then the stimulus that brings relief, a message, a call, a look. Then the emotional high, and finally the crash, when he goes back to who he really is. Inconsistent, absent, unable to hold space for your worth. And there you are again, waiting for him, repeating the cycle, believing that someday he'll realize your value, believing that if you hang on a bit longer, if you behave better, if you stop complaining so much, he'll change. But he's not going to change, because he's already figured out that he doesn't have to do anything extraordinary for you to stay. He already knows that giving you a single crumb is enough to make you come running back. And that's not his fault. It's your unconscious pattern trying to fill a void with the wrong mold. Jung spoke of the soul's longing as that deep drive to feel whole again. But when you haven't healed your original wound, the one that might go back to childhood, to not feeling seen, loved, or validated by the very people who were supposed to hold you emotionally, that longing gets distorted. It's no longer a desire for true connection. It becomes a desperate urgency to borrow some sense of self-worth through someone else. So let me be crystal clear. No relationship that makes you doubt your own worth is love. If you constantly need someone to reassure you that you're enough, that you're important, that you're worthy, then love has stopped being a bridge and has become a crutch. And if you collapse every time that person pulls away, it's because you were never really standing on your own to begin with. Here's something profound and healing you need to understand. You don't need to be loved in order to feel valuable. You need to feel valuable so you can choose only relationships that love you truly. And when I say truly, I'm not talking about intensity or pretty words. I'm talking about consistency, presence, reciprocity, real care. But to get there, you first have to break the cycle of addiction. And to break it, you have to stop seeking in him what only you can give yourself. Validation, security, purpose, self-love. It's not fair to you to keep depending on someone else's gaze to feel alive. It's not fair to your soul to keep begging someone else to confirm what you haven't yet confirmed for yourself. And here comes the most powerful step. Start validating your own worth before the next crumb arrives. When you're about to text him and you stop yourself, that's the moment. When you're about to excuse his absence and instead you tell yourself the truth, that's the moment. When you feel like you can't go on without him and you hug yourself even tighter, that's the sacred moment. That's the moment when the addiction loses its power and your soul regains its center. Do you want to stop feeling small? Do you want to stop being in relationships where you're given less than your worth? Then start by remembering who you are when no one's watching, when there are no messages, no promises, no external validation, because it's in that blank space that your power is forged. And I promise you this, when you feel whole without needing to be chosen, only then will you begin to attract relationships that choose you for real. Not out of pity, not out of need, but because you're vibrating from a place where you're not begging for love, you're radiating it. And in the next part, we're going to dive into that wound at its deepest core. You're going to discover why you get attached to people who diminish you and how to reclaim your center without the drama. Stick around, because what comes next could change everything. If it's hard for you to let go, it's because your self-esteem still believes there's nothing better out there. There's a brutal truth that many of us don't want to accept. You're not struggling to let go because you love him. You're struggling to let go because your self-esteem hasn't fully awakened yet. Because a part of you, the most wounded, the oldest, the neediest part, still believes that what this person is giving you is the best you can hope for. And yes, it's harsh to hear that. But if you let it sink in, that truth might be the key that sets you free. When a woman hasn't healed her emotional roots, when her story is marked by lack, abandonment, rejection, unexplained silences, and conditional affection, then her standard of love becomes distorted. She learns to settle for the bare minimum, to confuse intensity with love, to believe that the things that hurt must be worth more because they come at such a cost. And that's a dangerous trap. Carl Jung said that what we don't make conscious repeats itself as fate. And this fate we're talking about, loving someone who makes you feel small, being unable to let go of someone who doesn't truly choose you, isn't a punishment. It's a reflection. It's an external representation of what your self-esteem still believes you deserve. And here's the key. You're not trapped because of him. You're trapped because of the image your inner child still holds as true love. You're not hooked because he's your soulmate. You're hooked because your emotional system has been conditioned to survive on scraps, and it's terrified at the thought of something bigger, healthier, more expansive, because that's unknown territory. Let me tell you a true story that perfectly represents this dynamic. Her name is Sabrina. She was 29 years old and had been in a relationship for almost 3 years with a man who wouldn't acknowledge her publicly, who wouldn't commit, who showed up only when he felt like it, yet somehow managed to tell her things like, "You're the most important person in my life," even after weeks of silence. Sabrina would cry, get frustrated. She knew deep down it wasn't right, but she couldn't let him go. One day, after a session where we talked about her family history, her emotionally absent father, and a mother who tried to earn love through sacrifice, Sabrina said something I'll never forget. "Maybe deep down I still believe this is all there is for me." And there it is, the key. That's the unconscious programming so many women repeat, believing they deserve love, but only love with conditions. Love that hurts, love that squeezes tight, love that shows up but never stays. And let me say this with every bit of strength in my voice. That is not love. That is learned emotional resignation. You were not created to settle for half-hearted connections. Your soul was not designed to beg for scraps of attention. You didn't come into this world to wait around, hoping that someday someone will finally love you the way you deserve, while you're breaking inside every time they don't. If you can't let him go, it's not because your heart needs him. It's because your wound still hasn't been convinced that there's something better out there. And yes, there is something better. But to access that better, you have to raise your own perception of your worth. You have to look in the mirror, even with tears in your eyes if you must, and say to yourself, "I won't settle anymore." Because every time you settle, you abandon yourself. And every time you accept something you know you don't deserve, you're teaching your nervous system that this pain, this uncertainty is what love is. But you can reprogram yourself. Your self-esteem is not a life sentence, it's a muscle. And just like the body gets stronger through repetition, discipline, and intention, your self-esteem can grow stronger if you stop seeking your worth in the eyes of someone who doesn't know what true worth is. And if right now you're wondering, how do I do that? How do I let go of someone if part of me still feels like there's nothing else out there? The answer isn't magic. It's a decision. When your energy expands, he can no longer hold on to you or manipulate you. Listen to this with your soul wide open. Not everything that breaks is a loss. Some connections don't break. They become misaligned because you no longer fit into that frequency, because your soul refuses to keep shrinking itself just to belong, because your energy has begun to expand. And when that happens, something magical and brutally honest takes place. He can no longer hold on to you. He can no longer manipulate you. He can no longer confuse you, because you no longer vibrate at the level where games are played with silence, where affection is rationed out to maintain control, where replies come only when it's convenient and disappear when you're starting to feel secure. When your energy changes, the game ends. Not because he changed, but because you are no longer playable. Let me share a true story so you can see this clearly. Her name is Vanessa, and for almost 4 years, she was trapped in a relationship that made her doubt herself constantly. He was the typical charming man who knew exactly what to say whenever Vanessa was about to leave. He promised he would change. He swore he'd heal his wounds, that this time things would be different. But his actions always told a different story. He'd disappear, come back, ask for time, say he didn't know what he wanted. And Vanessa accepted it, justified it, waited for him, until something inside her literally broke. It wasn't an argument. It wasn't cheating. It wasn't an insult. It was one more silence. But this time, her soul couldn't take it. Vanessa didn't scream. She didn't beg. She didn't chase after him. She simply woke up. And in that awakening, she started doing something she'd never done before. She began raising her frequency, not to vibrate higher and lure him back, but to vibrate authentically so she'd become impossible to manipulate. She started speaking truths to herself in the mirror. She wrote down everything she'd tolerated and vowed never to allow it again. She began healing her wounds of abandonment, not through repression, but with awareness. She reconnected with her body, her intuition, her feminine power. And above all, she stopped justifying the unjustifiable. And what happened next was extraordinary. He came back, as he always did, with sweet words and new excuses. But this time, something was different. Vanessa didn't get angry. She didn't block him. She didn't say, "I hate you." She simply didn't feel the same effect anymore. And do you know why? Because her energy was no longer vibrating in need. It was vibrating in sovereignty. Manipulation only works on someone who's still afraid of losing. But Vanessa was no longer afraid, because what she'd regained was worth more than any half-hearted, "I love you," her self-love. And here's the truth nobody tells you. When your energy expands, manipulators lose their power. Not because you suddenly became stronger, but because they only ever knew how to play with your emptiness. But if your emptiness begins to fill up with presence, boundaries, and truth, there's simply no room left for them. Carl Jung put it another way. No one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And you, when you bring your wound into the light, when you take responsibility for it instead of asking someone else to fix it, when you choose to validate yourself, to choose yourself, to stand by yourself, you ignite an inner light so powerful that no one who doesn't love themselves can handle being around it. Because someone who only knew how to control you through fear won't know what to do with your freedom. Someone who only knew how to dim your light with insecurity can't handle your certainty. Someone who only knew how to come back whenever they sensed you were broken will get lost when they see you whole. And that, even though it may hurt at first, is the most healing thing that can ever happen to you. You weren't created to be understood by everyone. You were created to be true to yourself. And if that means some people drift away, so be it. You're not losing them. You're reclaiming yourself. Your expansion will always feel uncomfortable for those who were comfortable with your smaller version. But don't stunt your growth just because someone else chose to stay small. Remember this every time it hurts to let go. You're not losing a man. You're leaving behind a frequency that no longer represents you. And if today you find yourself at that point where you still miss him, but you don't want the same thing anymore, where it still hurts, but you know there's something more waiting for you, where you still feel the temptation to go back, but also the strength to stay with yourself, you're standing at the threshold, and that threshold is sacred because it marks the end of your old self and the birth of the woman that no one will ever be able to manipulate again. And now that you've come this far, I need to tell you one more thing in this conclusion, something that could seal this transformation if you're willing to stay just a few seconds longer. Now you know the truth. That love that made you feel small was never love. It was the reflection of a wound that no longer belongs to you. What you called a connection was a pattern. What you called destiny was an unconscious repetition. And what you believed was love was actually your shadow begging for recognition. But today you chose something different. Today you opened a new chapter. Today your soul dared to look clearly at what you used to justify with tenderness. And that changes everything. Because when a woman awakens, she doesn't need revenge. She needs truth. And when that truth becomes flesh, when it settles in your body as certainty, you never again shrink yourself so someone else can feel big. You are so much more than all the times you begged, waited, or cried for someone who couldn't see you. You are everything that comes afterward. You are the rebirth that happens when the wound no longer calls the shots. You are the vibration that rises when you no longer need to convince anyone of your worth. And to help keep this energy alive within you, I want to ask you something very special. If this message touched something deep inside you, leave a comment right now with the phrase, "I no longer shrink for anyone. I am complete in myself." Because when a woman declares this publicly, she's not saying it only for the world. She's engraving it in her soul, honoring it in her energy, and transforming it into her new vibrational code. Write that phrase as a symbol that this is no longer just another video you watched, but a point of no return. If this message resonated with your soul, it's time to take the next step. Subscribe now to keep raising your vibration. With each new video, give this content a like so that more souls can hear what has freed you today. Share this video with anyone you know who also needs to let go in order to heal. And of course, leave your declaration in the comments so this message gets sealed into your energy. But above all, don't leave just yet. There's so much more waiting for you. Dive into the other videos here on the channel and keep expanding your energy and your power. I'll see you in the next video.